So about 2 weeks ago, I went to the Ohio Aquaculture Association conference, and I was struck by two kind of competing narratives that I heard there. On the one hand, there was a presentation of research survey results of seafood consumers that found a difference between wild or farmed attributes from respondents in the North Central region. The attribute of healthy and the label product of USA were most important across genders and ages. At the same time, I heard from aquaculture producers that expressed that telling the story of aquaculture was a need, and that messaging about aquaculture should emphasize that wild caught fish is not better than farmed fish. And they also expressed that overwhelmingly, they said that their supply could not meet the demand for their product. They were always selling out. So I think this illustrates that there's a complicated relationship we have with seafood, and especially with aquaculture. So today we can take a look at the different resources we have available in Ohio and similarly across the Great Lakes region to access and include seafood in our diets. First, what is Sea Grant? Sea Grant is a federal university partnership that includes 34 programs in the United States. All of these are based at universities in coastal states, also in Puerto Rico and Guam. The structure of Sea Grant follows the land grant model of research, outreach, and extension. And our goal is to bring together science and communities to create and maintain healthy coastal environments. So as I said, the structure mimics the land grant model. However, we do have different areas of work that we focus on. Here at Ohio Sea Grant, we have Stone Lab up on South Bass Island, which is a research station and a hub for water quality research and water snake research, along with running large and small grant programs. That is kind of our research component. Educational opportunities at the island include field trips, workshops, professional development, and 4 credit classes offered by OSU departments. We also have 6 extension staff, which I'm one, all based along the shores of Lake Erie, but serving statewide. We focus on different topics, including fisheries, clean marinas, green infrastructure, community and economic development, and aquaculture. As Amanda mentioned, we're also a part of the Great Lakes Aquaculture Collaborative. This collaborative is a 3-year federally funded project led by Minnesota Sea Grant and includes all of the states here in light blue. It also includes Lake Champlain up there in the right-hand corner. Ohio Sea Grant is a partner, and GLAC reflects our vision of aquaculture and defines some of our values. So really, we're seeking to help Great Lakes region food fish farmers develop businesses that are economically sustainable, meaning that a food fish business is economically viable for indefinitely or a prolonged period of time. Environmentally sustainable, meaning that a food fish business actively protects the environment. This includes an operation that does not release pollutants, does not deplete or destroy natural resources, and does not intentionally or unintentionally introduce fish or pathogens or other species into public and other waters. And finally, socially sustainable, meaning that food fish businesses are good neighbors, actively contribute to the health and well-being of their communities. This includes fair wages, safe working conditions, and workforce diversity. So what is aquaculture? Most simply, it's farming in water. More specifically, it includes raising aquatic plants, algae, and animals for the purpose of food, sport, bait, ornamentals, or conservation and preservation. Anyone who has ever had a fish tank or aquarium has practiced aquaculture. So why aquaculture? A few reasons. One, since about the 1980s, wild caught fish numbers have plateaued. Aquaculture fills a need for protein and the industry can grow. And I also just want to emphasize, this is not a wild caught or aquaculture or versus aquaculture, but instead wild caught and aquaculture. Wild caught and aquaculture work together to conserve and protect the environment while also feeding people. There are trade-offs and advantages for both, which we'll discuss. So I want to get some feedback from those of you who are here. So we've got a couple of questions. Amanda's going to launch the polls for me one at a time, and just to get some feedback and information about how you consume seafood. So first, on average, how many of your meals a month include fish or seafood?
All right, there's 9 out of 11 responses, so I'll go ahead and close it in maybe 10 seconds.
Okay.
Go ahead and share the results.
Well, it looks like about half of you are actually getting the USDA's dietary recommendations of 2 to 3 meals a week or more. That's probably more than most people. All right. So our next question will be, how do you purchase most of your seafood?
All right, we've got 10 out of 11 responses, so I am going to go ahead and end that.
Looks good. And I think that's probably what we would expect from the general public, mostly processed. We have one final. Did you or a family member fish for food in the last year?
All right, we've got 10 out of 11 responses, so I'm going to go ahead and end that.
Okay. Not many fishers in there. That's okay. And then finally, we weren't able to do this in the poll, but if in the chat, you can enter your answer for this. What is the most important attribute to you when you're purchasing fish or seafood? Is it that it's a certain type of fish? Is it a price point? Is it something on the label that you're looking for? So we have a couple: freshness, sustainability, then healthiness, type and quality, price. Okay, so it is interesting that we are on the OFPN call and nobody mentioned local. Sustainable's in there for sure, but not local. So that's interesting. But that does go along with that consumer survey that some folks at Purdue and MSU did, where again, they found that most people are looking for healthy and for product of USA. Well, thanks for participating. So I want you to reflect on some of your answers and compare to other types of proteins that you eat. And just ask yourself, do you apply the same values to seafood and fish products that you do to other types of food, whether it's beans, poultry, beef, etc. So to pull back and look at the big picture, I'm just going to go through a number of facts that we know about seafood. So globally, seafood comes from both wild-caught and farmed sources. Environmental standards and regulations in the United States contribute to seafood sustainability. Seafood is the only food source where more of our food comes from wild than from farms. While wild harvests have plateaued and aquaculture has increased, aquaculture still accounts for less than 10% of our domestic seafood production. 1/3 of seafood consumed by Americans is domestically wild caught or farmed, and the majority is imported. And just to complicate the story, much of our US seafood is exported to other countries for processing and then imported back. About 20% of us are eating our weekly recommended dietary guidelines by the USDA. This group is a little bit more than that. But long story short, even though the US population is eating less seafood than is recommended, our supply of safe, sustainable domestic seafood, both wild caught and aquaculture, is far from meeting the demand. So just some questions to think about. Is there a role for domestic food fish aquaculture to fill this gap in supply by producing a healthy, nutrient-rich, affordable product? And provide a local and sustainable protein source, filling an important gap in our food system and diets. Fish are often framed as a natural resource and left out of our food system conversations. So here in Ohio, I want to talk about the 3 ways that we have to access fish that protect both our natural resources and make them available as a food source. These include our commercial fishery in Lake Erie, fishing for food by anglers, and aquaculture, fish that are farmed in inland, outdoor, and indoor production systems. According to the ODNR, Ohio's commercial fishing industry includes less than 24 licensed operations and a dockside value of $3.5 million in 2020. Yellow perch, white bass, and channel catfish top the list of species both in value and volume of the lake's commercial harvest. The majority of the harvest occurs from March through July of the year. Recreational or sport fishing in Ohio is valued at more than $1 billion, with yellow perch and walleye topping the list of favorite species, along with bass and steelhead trout. While not all fish caught recreationally are eaten, it is an important source for those who do. And then I'm going to split aquaculture into 2 parts. So first, we're going to talk about state fish hatcheries, and then we'll talk more extensively about fish farms. So aquaculture is a part of fisheries management in the form of state-run fish hatcheries. Hatcheries are places where fish are spawned and raised from egg through their early life stages, then released into the wild public waters for species conservation, endangered species recovery, and to enhance recreational fishing opportunities. The ODNR operates 6 state hatcheries where fish are raised to stock Lake Erie, rivers, and inland lakes. Since it is the raising of fish in a controlled environment, the hatchery system is aquaculture. The message here, wild caught does not always mean wild raised. Aquaculture farms in Ohio raise fish as a hobby or commercially, mostly for food, sport fish, for private pond stocking, and ornamental fish. And in the Ohio Revised Code, aquaculture is in the definition of aquaculture. So what does this look like? The USDA's Census of Agriculture provides one source we rely on to quantify aquaculture. The census is conducted every 5 years as a part of the Census of Agriculture. The Census of Agriculture is every 5 years, and with that, the Census of Aquaculture is a supplemental to the main Census of Agriculture. So in the agricultural census, there's just a few questions about whether aquaculture is practiced, what species, pounds or volume, and then annual sales. From that, the respondents then receive the Census of Aquaculture. And from there, we can learn a little bit more about the details. The last survey was done in 2017, 2018. A few things to note. Survey response obviously is never 100%. So what we're seeing here is in the census is an underestimation in the number of farms and therefore sales. However, when we look at the species and production systems, the relative proportions are correct. So according to the last census, we had 59 farms covering 1,300, almost 1,400 acres and almost $7 million in sales, which we'll note is more than the commercial fishery in Lake Erie. To put this into perspective, though, we can compare the aquaculture sector to agriculture overall and see that it's a very, very small portion of agricultural activity in the state. The Census of Aquaculture also breaks farms into categories by types of products sold. These categories are not mutually exclusive. A single farm can be raising multiple types of products. So here we can see that food fish and sport fish top the list. And then lower on the list are bait fish and ornamentals. So a snapshot of what food fish species are being raised by the most number of farms. This same grouping of fish are the most in volume, but they're all kind of in a slightly different order based on that. So right now we're just looking at it based on number of farms that are raising this particular fish. So our tilapia are our top yellow perch, carp, catfish, and trout. So tilapia is the only fish on this list that would not be found in our native waters here in Ohio. And then just a look at the other sectors. So sport fish, we have a different group of species here. Obviously bait fish. So what does aquaculture look like? There are a handful of methods that fish farmers are using in Ohio, but ponds definitely dominate, followed by recirculating systems or RAS, and then raceways. Aquaponics, which combines fish culture and plant production, also make up a small portion of indoor facilities. What we will not find in Ohio are net pens and cages. These are kind of what we typically symbolize as aquaculture, but these are really practiced in the ocean as mariculture. In the Great Lakes, only in Lake Huron on the Canadian side are they practicing small amounts of aquaculture in the Great Lakes. Otherwise, in the United States, it is not permitted. So in practice, we can sum up a typical fish farmer in Ohio. They're usually a male proprietor or husband and wife. They don't run their business as a primary income source. They're utilizing ponds or those indoor RAS production systems, and they're selling whole live fish, either to larger pond management companies or direct to Asian grocers. So we're gonna take a closer look at some of our farms, some examples of them. But again, just looking at aquaculture, it's a farming practice with potential for growth in Ohio. We saw from the aquaculture census that it notes that there are 59 farms. While we know that that's an underestimation, there still are not that many in Ohio. Local production, processing, and transport of fish shortens supply chains, lessens food miles, and delivers a fresher product. We know this across agricultural products. Production methods, species, end markets, and processing are all factors affecting the profitability and economic feasibility of aquaculture. So let's take a look at some different fish farms. Here we have a grouping of farms that are mostly in Northwest Ohio, have been around for 20 or more years, and are growing in ponds for stocking and also selling pond supplies. In addition, Kalalas does sell freshwater prawns and does some consulting. And this picture here is of Remlinger Fish Farm, one of the older farms in the state. So another example of fish farms are two that are producing perch from spawning through harvest. As I mentioned, many of our producers are using ponds. These two are as well, but some of their early life stage rearing happens indoors. They are raising product either for pond stocking or for food, depending on their clients. Some indoor examples of fish farms. These are all operating some version of a recirculating aquaculture system. On the left, we have Ripple Rock Fish Farms. In the center, Freedom Fish Farms. And on the right, the Ocean's Friend. Ripple Rock and Freedom Fish both are growing tilapia and are both mostly selling to those Asian grocers and doing a very small amount of pond stocking. But they make regular trips to the Columbus area and to the Cleveland area. The Ocean's Friend, they have an interesting model that has just developed. They have been growing saltwater shrimp for a while and more recently opened up a restaurant in the Polaris area just outside of Columbus, where the owner, Ashton Chen, is only sourcing seafood from the US and when possible from Ohio. So he is really looking at how he can support his fellow farmers in Ohio, give them some exposure and give them a reliable market to sell their product to. An example from Southwest Ohio is Root House Aquaponics. They started just a few years ago and are growing a variety of lettuces and greens. They're selling direct, they're selling at farmers markets, they're selling to restaurants. They have a whole variety of accounts, and they're growing tilapia that they sell as well. And again, they're selling those whole, not necessarily to an Asian market, but to restaurants and a place down there called Jungle Gyms. And then in Union County, we have Fresh Harvest Farm, another aquaponics facility that's growing exclusively kale, but they're using yellow perch in their systems. They're selling exclusively to a small chain of pizza restaurants in the Columbus area that use their kale in their salads. And then they're also selling some of their yellow perch to another fish farmer who has a processing facility on site and sells at farmers markets. One thing I do also want to add, especially, well, not even especially about the indoor farms, most of these farmers are building their own facilities, sometimes from kits, but a lot of it is figuring out stuff on their own, visiting other fish farmers, and putting things together based on the site that they have. And just a couple other examples that have kind of more unique business models. So Freshwater Farms of Ohio in Urbana County in the Dayton area, it's been around since 1983, and they sell fish for stocking. They also sell aeration equipment for ponds. They have a store that includes different types of processed products. They have a processing plant right there on site. And then they also have a shrimp and fish festival in September. They're one of the few farms that openly has agritourism. So you can visit their website and find out when they're open and take a tour through the place. And then also in the Cincinnati area, we have big fish farms where what Renee is doing is technically ranching paddlefish. And then she makes caviar from the roe and also sells paddlefish meat. So she is another producer that has her own processing facility as well. So how is aquaculture regulated? A lot of it is taken on by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife. They're the ones who issue permits for facilities. They also issue permits for transporters, white emmer dealers, bait dealers, and wholesalers. The permitting process is a yearly process, and there are two classes based on the species that are being cultured. And that's one way that they're keeping track of making sure that invasive species aren't being reared in the state. ODNR also does registration for any facility with the capacity to withdraw more than 1,000 gallons of water, which applies to groundwater withdrawals, surface water withdrawals, or any combination of the two. So even if the facility wouldn't normally be using that amount, if they have the capacity to, they have to register with ODNR. And then other state agencies that are involved, the Ohio Department of Health is involved when fish are being imported or exported to regulate fish health. And then the EPA is involved when stormwater permits are required for aquaculture ponds. So some important work was done when the COVID-19 pandemic first started by a team led by Jonathan Van Setten at Virginia Tech. The impacts of COVID-19 on U.S. aquaculture, aquaponics, and allied businesses was released 4 times in 2020 and twice in 2021 to record the impacts COVID had to the aquaculture industry and allied businesses. These are just some of the key findings from Q1, which obviously reflect what a lot of businesses were going through at the time, an immediate and extreme impact on their ability to operate. Many of them were able to survive and even thrive as the pandemic progressed. Many pond stocking, or all the pond stockers that I have spoken to in the state at least, sold out of product, and those that were selling food fish were able to pivot and find other markets. However, we don't at this time know how many businesses really did go out of business nationally. Ohio Sea Grant's been assisting with the report writing on these, and those results from all of the compiled reports so far are available on Virginia Tech's website if you're interested. So importantly, from these results, they were able to get the attention of the federal government and make some pandemic relief possible for aquaculture, which had not been on the list previously. So aquaculture, and especially freshwater aquaculture, is not usually represented well for federal relief programs, disaster relief, and also crop insurance. So these results were really pivotal in getting aquaculture businesses able to apply for PPP loans and other programs, for example. So shifting to processing and some of the infrastructure and regulations around that. There are really less than probably 24 fish processors in Ohio that cut fish. So what that means is someone who's taking their knife and literally cutting the whole fish and filleting it or processing it from that point on. Most of the people that are on a fish processor list are doing any other thing with seafood, from making a tuna fish sandwich to, any kind of other type of product, not actually getting a whole product in and processing it into fillets or something similar. Sorry, I don't have the fish and fishery products are regulated by the Ohio Administrative Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, and also the Ohio Revised Code. And seafood processors require seafood HACCP training, certification, and a HACCP plan. The Ohio Department of Agriculture is the department that inspects and regulates food processing establishments. If someone wants to get a frozen food license because they want to sell their packaged product frozen after processing, that is a separate license from processing. As the law is written, mobile processing facilities are not allowed. So you can see here how it's written, and really what they focus on is the premise or part of a premise. And you'll notice that processing regulations don't involve the USDA the way other livestock do. However, there are other departments involved. So Ohio EPA is involved if there's a septic system on site that needs to be approved. And then also the Ohio Department of Health. When there's water involved, they're the ones who are going to be testing water quality, and that includes ice. They're also involved is the license if the person wants to process at a farmer's market directly. So these next two sections, I realize in this talk, we're not going to be able to cover all the facets of aquaculture and all the issues and all the assets. So these sections are really to put on the table the topics that could each be in their own discussion. Some are specific to Ohio, some aren't, but things I'd be happy to talk more about at a later date, things I'm wondering where the interest is from other folks. And if there's anything that you think should be added for future, let me know. So looking at some of the issues in aquaculture, I don't want to paint a rosy picture that aquaculture is this perfect system. It certainly is not. However, as I noted, regulations and environmental standards do make a huge difference in the United States. And there is also a large difference between mariculture and freshwater aquaculture. But from this, you can see that some of the issues include environmental impacts, the use of marine ingredients in feeds. So that refers to the fact that some fish are harvested specifically to be put back into fish feeds for carnivorous fish. The usage of fresh water, especially if it's drawing large amounts out of wells or other places. And then the issue of escape. So sometimes in aquaculture, they're using sterile bred fish species, or maybe in rare cases, a species that wouldn't be native to an area. So they really want to make sure that they're mitigating escape from fish farms. So some of the major challenges for the industry in Ohio, many farms aren't vertically integrated, meaning that they're relying on fry fingerlings from out of state. So their process doesn't work unless they get their seed from somewhere else. There's also a steep learning curve in aquaculture. Agriculture in any form is not easy. But as I said, for fish, we have all these different species to think about. And for a lot of them, we don't really have some of the production information that we might need to make people successful. And we really don't have the processing resources. Right now, there are probably a handful of fish farmers who have their own small processing facilities along the lakeshore. Commercial fishermen are able to process their fish, but aquaculture folks aren't going to head up there, and most of their people are filleting certain types of fish. So for a farmer, it can be expensive, it cannot be profitable, and it can totally change their business plan to add processing to their business. Additionally, aquaculture is very risky. One weather event, one power outage, and your fish can be killed in a very short amount of time. Biosecurity plans are very important in aquaculture. They're part of good aquacultural practices, just like we have good agricultural practices and best management practices to prevent disease and pest infestations, and also protect the health of fish and humans. And sometimes aquaculture farms are targeted by animal rights groups. And limitations in aquaculture include access to aquatic veterinarians. There are a limited number of these aquatic veterinarians, and they also, which means that they would have to travel larger distances to get to farms. But establishing those relationships are very important, just like for any livestock. There's also limited access to treatments. Many farmers aren't using treatments because they are being very careful about preventative controls and watching the behavior of their fish and watching their water quality. However, when issues do arise, the amounts of treatments that are available to fish farmers are very small and include either medicated feed or other treatments that are only allowed to be used under the guidance of a veterinarian. There's also seasonality. So for a lot of outdoor producers, obviously they are subject to the weather, just like the rest of us. And it also affects certain species indoors as well. So like I said, a lot of people are relying on fry and fingerling from other states where they are raising those fish outdoors to the point that they're selling them to the indoor recirculating aquaculture facility, which really means, producers need to be on site. I've had some people say that fish farming is kind of like dairy farming. You're up in the morning and you're there late at night, and you don't want to be far away in case something happens. You want to be checking on your fish, checking on your water quality, and making sure that your fish aren't stressed and that they're not sick from stress. So now to more of the positive side of things. Here in Ohio, we have the Aquaculture Feed Co-op, which producers buy into, become members of, and then are part of bulk feed deliveries. And we also have the Ohio Aquaculture Association that producers and even non-producers can join for educational opportunities, for networking. They produce a newsletter and some events during the year. As I mentioned, I was just at their conference about 2 weeks ago. And in the region, it's one of the largest and most active associations. Many people look to Ohio as an example of what a good association can be. However, even they have some issues where membership doesn't always get involved in things, just like in any other place. However, both of these are things to build upon. People especially look at the feed co-op and say, you know, what else could this co-op become? And then we know that fisheries and aquaculture do already contribute importantly to our food systems. It's just not something that we're talking about much. We know that we can meet the demands for fish and maintain biological sustainable fisheries in tandem with using sustainable aquaculture. So a lot of this is really about having conversations and increasing aquaculture literacy. So for consumers, other people in agriculture, anyone from lenders to even policymakers, anyone making decisions around agriculture or food can benefit from learning more about where our fish come from and what sustainable resources we have to access them locally and in our region. Now to return a bit to the Great Lakes Aquaculture Collaborative, I kind of wind things down here and get to any questions folks have. But I want to mention some current action items and projects that we have with GLAC and that we have independent of GLAC. So what are we doing to increase opportunities for fisheries and aquaculture? We are accomplishing that goal in multiple ways with GLAC. One of those ways is by presenting educational webinars that reach both the general public, fish producers, academics, researchers, extension folks. Anyone who wants to join is able to join these. We especially gear things towards folks in the Great Lakes region, but anybody anywhere can join these. And so these are just some examples of webinars that we've had in the last year. We also do one main event each year. This past year, we did virtual farm tours and interviews over the course of 3 days, where we featured 6 different farms in a recorded interview or recorded farm tour, and then did live interviews. Ripple Rock Farms, which I mentioned earlier, one of our Ohio farms, was our Ohio featured farm. And if you're interested in viewing any of those, all 6 farms are very different. As I showed you here, some are pond producers, some are producing indoors, they're different species. And each of our 6 farms that we highlighted, we're doing a different thing. So you can find those either on the GLAC website or on Ohio Sea Grants YouTube page. And then GLAC is also involved in research. So these are the main research areas that are being worked on right now. There was recently a themed issue of Choices magazine on the US economics of aquaculture, where some of this research was summarized, but a lot of it is not yet complete. So more journal articles and articles to come. also have convened advisory groups, both state and a regional group that is made up of state representatives. And these people really inform our outreach, education, and research activities. They have helped us look at what types of webinars to produce, what topics to look at. They keep us abreast of different regulatory issues happening in different states. And then they get to interact with each other in this regional group, which is really helpful because across state lines, aquaculture regulations, and even the number and type of farm in the atmosphere of aquaculture is very different, even within just our Great Lakes region. Then, as I mentioned, we maintain a website where you can find all of this information, research summaries, recordings, so forth. Associated with GLAC is a site called the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder. And this has been designed to connect consumers to fish sellers. We recently went through a usability study of this site, so we'll be making some updates to it, which is super interesting, I have to say. But this website is for wild caught fish, it's for aquaculture, any type of seafood product that someone is raising or harvesting, as long as they are doing it directly, their business can be added to the site. And basically it gives them the benefit of having a website if they don't already have one, which many producers don't. So they get an expanded business listing that has all the information about their business. And it helps people kind of see what's going on in the region as well. And I should mention additionally, there are two other mapping sites. One is called Eat Midwest Fish, and another one is called Eat Wisconsin Fish. And those both have slightly different parameters around them, but they also include lots of recipes and talks with farmers on their sites, where ours here does not. And then here in Ohio, we're engaged in a few things right now. So we are doing an aquaculture needs assessment where we really want to know those baseline business facts. We know from the aquaculture census that we're getting an underestimate of things, that people don't always reply to those, and that really the on the ground folks know more about what's going on, where, when, and how. Also identifying high priority issues and top needs for those producers, and also for consumers. A lot of this work is also consumer based. So all of this will help inform our direction. I came on just over a year ago. Prior to that, our extension lead, Tori Gabriel, who is our fisheries extension person, was in the role, but just kind of as an auxiliary. So we really haven't been engaged in aquaculture very long and are trying to kind of find our path in that relationship between industry and research and outreach. One thing that I'm likely going to be reaching out to a number of you on are focus groups and interviews that will be coming up this year. The goal of this is really to get, again, that on the ground community-based information about what is going on, what would people like to be going on in terms of their access to local fish. So we'll be doing interviews with folks who run food hubs, farmers markets, kitchen incubators, and then also doing focus groups with consumers to look at some of their perceptions here in Ohio. And then a final project that we have going on right now is, again, trying to raise aquaculture literacy. So we're putting together display and outreach materials, which will be installed at the Aquatic Visitors Center at Stone Lab and the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, along with kind of a traveling version. And the Aquatic Visitor Center at South Best Island, if you've never been, gets a lot of traffic in the summer, just general, tourists visiting Put-in-Bay to people who are really interested in fishing and so forth. So it'll be a really great opportunity to reach a lot of people with this information. So some takeaways from this talk that I hope you'll think about. So we know that fish play an increasingly important role in U.S. food security, contributing that important protein, nutrient rich foods and employment. As I mentioned earlier, seafood demand outpaces supply domestically. And aquaculture is agriculture. It has unique challenges and benefits, but also some similarities with land-based agriculture as well. And not all aquaculture is equal. There's many species being cultured, there's many different production systems, and a lot of different management practices that go along with it. So when we think about aquaculture, we have to remember that it doesn't mean just one thing. And then another takeaway is that Ohio's fish farmers are mostly small family farms. As I said, they're usually either a single male proprietor or a couple of partners that are involved. There is a larger facility that will be coming on board called AquaBounty, which will kind of change the landscape of what's happening in Ohio. But for now, most of them are family farms, and then others are larger pond stocking and management companies. And finally, just a few calls to action. So I hope that you're on this call because you were curious about this topic, or you know a lot about the topic and want to give me more information. That's great too. But really seeking out research and science-based information, talking to commercial fishers and farmers, visiting a farm. These are all things that we talk about in our regular agriculture. The same applies here. We're really applying those same principles and practices. And then to observe and assess, where is fish available in your local circles? Is it available? Do you want it to be available? Why is it or why is it not available in some of these places? Is it because you don't know any fish farmers? Is it because you've approached a fish farmer and they don't have enough to sell? We really want to know kind of what that landscape looks like. And finally, continue the discussion. Why should we care about this? What does the industry need to grow? What are the best ways for lenders, for example, to be more familiar with aquaculture so that there's more financing options for people who want to get started or for people who want to diversify or expand? So those are just some of the things on my mind. My contact information is there. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. But now we can open things up for questions.
Nicole, when do you want me to launch the last 2 poll questions? Do you want to wait after the Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I'll go ahead, since there's 14 people, and just kind of start promoting people so that you have the ability to speak. If you're not in a place where you can use that option, you can still use Q&A.
Okay. And I was not looking at chat during the conversation, but I am now. So people want to either ask their questions first, and we can go back and forth with chat too.
I've got a question. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm really kind of interested in the processing, because it seems to me that to really get this to any scale, it's going to require some processing, either individually on farm, and I know you said there's some of that, or something more commercial or a co-op or something. And a lot of my work in local food, I look at institutional buying as a way, as kind of a trigger to ramp up. Do you know, are any of the Ohio growers are looking at, schools or hospitals or any institutions? And if you're serving something like that, that means there's probably some access to some processing.
So right now, nobody's really at the scale where they could be looking at institutional accounts. They could be doing it for purposes of education on a small scale. But this is one of those situations where, do you build the processing capacity first, or do you build the producers and their supply first? So it's kind of a supply and demand issue here.
Sort of a fish and egg issue.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't have the answer for how to solve this, except that I think if we can show that there is that demand, what kind of demand there is, something like maybe the feed co-op currently would be interested in looking into some kind of processing option. Also, the issue of the mobile processing not being allowed in Ohio has come up several times. I don't think that should necessarily be something people should worry about too much. What I've been told is that if people went to the right people to see if the rules could be rewritten on that, then it could be looked at. But that's not really the thing stopping us.
Okay, are you aware that there already is an effort by some people in Ohio to get mobile processing for meat and poultry?
Yeah.
I wonder if that could kind of help pave the way for.
Right, and I've been keeping up on what they've been up to, and I do hope that can do just that.
Great, thank you.
Nicole, there was a question submitted through the chat box that says, one of the biggest challenges to local food is affordability. I do a lot of work with hunger relief. Some small farmers are able to participate in WIC or other programs to make their products available to lower income populations. Can you speak to any efforts that might be looking at that within the local fish agriculture industry?
Mm-hmm. For those fish producers that are doing food fish right now, I don't think any of them have applied to accept those types of benefits. And like I said, most of them aren't selling at farmers markets or anything like that. But that is something, if they begin to sell at farmers markets more, where that would make the product more accessible for folks and more affordable. And sorry, Carol Smathers, Urbana County, I meant Champaign County, not Urbana County.
And then in the chat, there was a question about producers and how they update their information in Fish Finder. I don't know if you covered that one or not.
So currently, the way to get added is to contact your state Sea Grant contact. We are adding an ability for people to click on a form that they can add their own information, but that is kind of in trial right now. So for now, it's a phone call or an email to folks.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Speaking to a specific fish,
Mm-hmm.
are you aware of any concerns or regulations against growing white amur as a protein for people? Because it is the largest produced fish in the world for food, but not here. And then the other thing is there someone I could talk to about finding triploid fingerlings rather than having to spend the money on youths, which are quite expensive?
Yeah, so to your first question, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources regulates this. They do allow triploids of grass carp. It's a Class B permit, which is more expensive and does require your facility to be inspected. In terms of who would have those for you, the ODNR also does put out a fish propagators list,
Okay,
which lists what species producers can elect to be on the list, but it lists which species they have available. So that would be a good resource.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then I saw Julie had raised her hand. Julie, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, sure. Hi, this is Nicole. This is Julie from Ashtabula County. I work with local food issues here, and I have a perch farmer in the county who's been attempting to bring his product to market. And I've known him over the past 2 or 3 years, and he has not yet been able to tell me how much perch he can produce and kind of guarantee a harvest, or how much he'll have at a certain time. He does have some issues that he's working through. I'm just curious, is it possible that you could come consult on his site, or is there a team of people at OSU that can look at his operation and kind of determine what's happening? Because I don't necessarily have the expertise to know, how to advise them. That's my first question. And then I've got a follow-up if that's okay.
Yeah, to that one, we also have Matt Smith with OSU Extension. He is the kind of director for aquaculture. And when it comes to aquaculture systems, and he's really the expert on that and looking at water quality and kind of the setup of the system. I would be happy to assist, but I would say he would be the first call, and then I could assist with that.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question, I was just online to the Ohio Aquaculture Feed Co-op site while you were talking, and just noticed it said their next order dates were in 2019. Is that just an out-of-date website? I'm assuming that group's still active.
I'm sorry, it said what about 2018?
On the website, because they have the bulk orders for feed, and they said the next order would be submitted in.
They are still active.
Okay.
They just not on their website apparently, but yes, they are an active co-op.
Okay,
So the
okay.
contact information would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. And I see it's a follow-up from Haley, who asked the question about the Fresh Fish Finder site and how producers update what products they have available. So the site, you can sort by species that you're looking for, but also you can sort by whether you're looking for fish for food, for stocking, and so forth. So any of those types of products will be on the site.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, well, oh. Were you gonna say something, Brian?
No, I'm just thinking out loud. No, nothing else. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, well, if there's no other questions, we're gonna launch just 2 polls. These are what Nicole needs to do general evaluation for her sea grant work. So I'll go ahead and launch those. If you could take those, that'd be super great. And then while we are doing these polls, I know Nicole has mentioned several times throughout the presentation that she'd be looking for input from the audience. So if this is something you're passionate about, or you want to connect with Nicole after this, I'm sure she'd be excited to chat with you.
Mhm. Definitely. Thanks for being here today, everyone, and for the questions and for listening.
All right, we've got about 58% participation on this first poll, so I'm going to give it another few seconds and I'll go ahead and close that. All right, so here's the results of the first one. All right, and I will go ahead and do the next one.
It's okay. You can't hurt my feelings by, I know these are like evaluation questions that we're just putting up there for. Please be honest.
All right, we're at 75% participation, so I will go ahead and end that one and share the results. Those are pretty good results. All right, so those are the last 2 poll questions we had. Nicole's contact information is right there on the last slide at the bottom. This webinar obviously was recorded, so what we will do is I will upload this to the Ohio Food Policy Network's YouTube channel, and this recording should be available by early next week. So if you want to revisit this or share it with a colleague, you can. And then our next virtual convening in March is actually going to focus on mobile meat processing. So it's a really great segue. It'll be mostly discussing red meat, but you will see information for that virtual convening come out through the listserv early next week as well. Thank you, Nicole, for spending the afternoon with us. I know that I know absolutely nothing about fish, so I am maybe a little overwhelmed in some ways, but super excited and looking forward to see how your work sort of progresses on this topic over the next year. And so that is all we have today. If you saw in the chat box earlier, I listed the Ohio Food Policy Network website, the listserv, and the policy agenda. So you can visit those if you're interested. And we hope to see you in March on our virtual convening. Thanks, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.